Welcome to Schoenberg's Perennials, and welcome back to Minimalism Part 2, where we're going to be talking about my favorite composer, John Adams. Woo! Not to be confused with the American politician of historical times.
There's a John Adams.
There is. If you
politics.
Google John Adams, you'll get way more results about the historical politician figure than you will about the composer. So you have to stipulate composer when you Google this guy.
Poor guy doesn't have a unique name.
No, he really doesn't. But I think he's a really interesting guy. So when we were introducing minimalism last week, we were talking at first about how it's used in movie soundtracks and in advertisements. And in those situations, it becomes more of a background noise. It's supporting what's going on visually. So it's almost like white noise. But not all minimalism is like that, as we found out listening to Steve Reich. And I think that John Adams is definitely not like that. I find that when I listen to his music, I get completely engrossed in what's going on, even though he's doing some similar things to Reich, where he's repeating a lot of stuff and then just kind of layering and stacking on top of it. But it's not designed to be in the background at all. So
I'm excited because I know very little about this guy.
Yeah, that was kind of same for me. Like, I don't know anything about Steve Reich, but every time I hear him, I'm like, I should listen to more of this person. So right back at you there. So John Adams was really influenced by John Cage's book, Silence, Lectures and Writings. John Cage is the guy who's notorious for his piece of music called 4 minutes and 33 seconds. He's also really famous for kind of using the sounds of the room and extended techniques with instruments, like his music where he stuck a bunch of objects into pianos to make a different instrument, basically. So that was one of John Adams's first early fascinations. He went on to study at Harvard. And then later on, he was teaching music at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. And that's where he really developed his own minimalist style.
This is John Adams.
Yeah. He wrote some...
So he studied at Harvard.
Oh, what's that?
John Adams studied at Harvard.
John Adams did, yeah. Yeah, and he was writing a lot of... He started out with some orchestral pieces, and his first stuff is, like, amazing. I think one of his earliest pieces is called Phrygian Gates, and it's, like... Look it up. Listen to it. It's great. But his first opera was Nixon in China, which is probably my favorite opera of all time. He was really influenced by Steve Reich and Philip Glass, as we mentioned last week. But his style is kind of more romantic, kind of along the lines of Wagner and Mahler. Like we mentioned last time also, he's really not into atonalism. I couldn't find the exact quote, but I remember reading an interview with him once where he said that he felt that atonal music just pushed the audience away, and he didn't want to do that. So he's reacting against Schoenberg stuff. He's reacting against serialism. Here's what he has to say about that stuff. Here's a quote from Adams. He said, "Basically, the materials of music were being systematically atomized and fractured just to see how far the envelope could be pushed. And I was uncomfortable with it. I liked rock. I liked jazz. I liked Sibelius. I liked Beethoven. And that's part of the reason I decided to leave the East Coast. And instead of going to Europe, I went west." So he's a very, very much an American composer who wanted to write stuff that would be honestly closer to pop music than wacky, atonal stuff.
He left the West Coast?
No, he moved away from the East Coast and he went to the West Coast. So he moved to San Francisco.
New York? Wasn't he one of those New York composers? Because I thought Steve Reich, him, Glass were all in New York at the same time.
He left there, so he must have been there at some point, but then he decided to go west, and I think that's how he started working a lot with, Peter Sellers and stuff.
He worked with Peter Sellers?
He's the opera director who he worked with for Nixon in China and a bunch of other projects.
Different Peter Sellers, but yes.
Oh, who are you thinking of?
The Pink Panther guy.
I don't know. Okay. Yeah. No,
The
so
original.
in the opera world, Peter Sellers is a wacky director who I think is actually really cool. He often does kind of modern adaptations of things, or he kind of thinks outside the box. I think that he's a really cool guy, but he's very strange.
Okay.
Yeah,
Both of the sellers are pretty strange.
I guess so. So we're going to be mainly listening to samples from Nixon in China, just because I love it, and I think it's got some really great examples of what minimalism is in there. It's also a great example of why I think opera can be really cool. One of the things I like about it is that it's obviously written about real people, and so, like in real life, the lines between who the villains are and who the heroes are very blurred. I mean, of course, in the story, we know that Chairman Mao is an evil person, but do we really like Mr. and Mrs. Nixon either? I mean, who really is the exact bad guy here? So I love that element to it. I like the way that he tells the story, and I like the way that he shows the personalities of the characters through the way that he writes the music, which I think is the probably the best thing that opera has to offer as a genre. So let's listen to the overture of Nixon in China, just a bit of this. I want to listen from the beginning up until when a little bit into where the chorus comes in. So that gives you actually enough of a feel for it there. We'll listen to the chorus bit a little bit later. So you can hear, first of all, we got the repetitive thing going on. Do, 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 do. Just a minor scale going up and up and up. And then on top of that, he's adding other textures. He's adding in... And also, you can also hear it's very tonal harmony. Again, we've got a 6 chord going to a 4 chord. It's basically pop music in the harmonies.
Yeah, it's like super. There's not much Steve Reich in there at all.
Nope.
I would say.
There's other stuff that John Adams did that's closer to Reich, like Common Tones in Simple Time, I think Shaker Loops, Short Ride in a Fast Machine, like a lot of his really, really famous orchestral stuff is more like that. Nixon in China, I think, is a whole other ballgame.
All right, where do we go from here?
Let's listen to where the chorus comes in, which I think is the next one there. Bear in mind, I think what's cool about this, and this is going to come up in a later example too, is that the minimalist style of repeating a phrase over and over again is really great for showcasing what was scary about communism, right? You repeat back what's in the little red book over and over and over again until you believe it.
That's a good subtext.
Yeah.
I like it. All right.
the opening to the opera is a chorus, a big chorus of lots of singers who are singing phrases from Mao's Red Book. And then they go into that phrase that they repeat over and over again with different emphases. I find it really catchy and pleasurable to listen to, but I also think it's a really cool way to set the scene for what China was like at this period of time.
Yeah, I could see it. Definitely.
Yeah.
It's got all the... It's a lot more melancholic than I expected.
Well, I mean, fucking, it's Chinese communism. Like, it's dark times.
For sure, but it's kind of like sad glass, but better.
Yeah.
So far, anyway.
Okay, well, let's listen to a bit that I don't think is sad so much. This is an interesting example of how the rhythm changes. Nicholas, you probably would have studied this if you did rhythm studies at VCC. Counting this, try to count what's going on here.
News. 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 As a kind of mystery. As a kind of mystery. When I shook hands with Joe and Lai, when I shook hands with Joe and Lai, on this bare field outside Peking, just now the whole world was listening. The whole world was listening.
How would you compare that to the idea of phasing that you were talking about last week?
Well, I'd say this is very different. This is kind of more of a... This sounds very, very, very Philip Glass to me. It doesn't have the phasing. I guess you could say he's changing times. So he's starting in because he's just going like triplets or like quarters, like 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 4 or 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. So he's sort of he's changing speeds. It's sort of kind of like a tape machine being sped up and slowed down slowly, like.
Yeah, but
and
just
it
with the
goes slow,
vocal
slow.
line, kind of like the orchestra is staying in the same time signature, 1 2 3 1 2 3, and then the vocalist over it is just basically saying the words at different times. It's news 4 5 6 news, right?
Yeah.
It's really fun to count.
Broken up into different chunks.
Yeah. So it sounds so okay, this is also one of the parts of this is that it seems like it's going to be easy when you look at the score. You're like, "Oh yeah, it's all in one time signature. There's not a lot of dissonance to worry about." Sure. And then you get to figuring out how to count this and not lose your place when you don't have your score in front of you. and that's when it's like, "Oh, I need to get better at counting," essentially.
I think at VCC, don't we? I remember doing this. We had to we had to like tap it out or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, you would have had done that if you did rhythm studies too, which I didn't get to do because it wasn't there the year that I was there. But I know that other people who were doing it, and I was actually really jealous because I wanted to count it too.
It was fun to count. It was hard, but it was fun.
So I mentioned earlier also how I think he uses his music to get characters across. So I want to compare two characters, and they're both characters that I have sang just in the practice room for fun because I think this music is really interesting. We're going to listen first to Mrs. Mao. She is really interesting because he does the thing where he's repeating phrases over and over again to emphasize the communist kind of rhetoric of like, smacking people repeatedly over the head with your propaganda, essentially. She also is cast as a coloratura soprano, so she's really high. And she's got all these repetitive phrases that are really, really high. The book, but like 3 octaves up from where I'm speaking right now. So she comes across as this terrifying, shrieky lady, which is accurate. Here's a little bit of Mrs. Mao's aria. Okay. I wanted to listen to Tracy because she's the best.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, I got it. That's very high.
Yeah, it's really high. It's the highest note she hits in that, I think, is a D that's above high C, which isn't the highest you can go, but she repeats it over and over again with the book with it's a huge jump. You need wicked technique for this, which is why I selected Tracy Dow singing this, because she is incredible. I saw her do this live, and it was one of the most inspiring things I've ever seen. She's ridiculous.
Yeah, it sounds it's high, but it also stays really high the entire time.
Exactly, yeah. The tessitura is all up there. There's no rest. You have to just be focused on your support the whole time and keep everything loose while you're doing that. It's a huge undertaking. I've taken it out and played around with it a few times, just for fun, because I'm never going to be cast as this, I don't think. But it's every time I'm just like, oh God, I got to go back and do more exercises before I'm ready for this every time. So you can really hear like the harshness of that character, right? And it's very repetitive and like dun, dun, like very rigid, right? Very rule based, and like this is not a woman that you want to mess around with. You can hear that in the music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, just a small tangent, is Adams the only one that you know of who's written operas as part of a minimalist composer?
It depends on whether you count what Glass has done, because Glass has done some stuff. Einstein on the
some
Beach is
operas?
technically an opera, sort of. I think he's done some other stuff too, but I'm just not so interested in him.
Okay. But it's because I think Adams has done more than one opera, right?
He's done a bunch. So he did The Death of Klinghoffer, which is interesting. We're going to listen to a sample of my other favorite one by him, which is Dr. Atomic. And he recently wrote a new one that I haven't even had time to listen to yet.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, he's done a bunch.
Where does this opera... Because I think I'm just having trouble fitting this within minimalism at the moment. Like, it's really interesting, and it has sort of elements of minimalism, but I'm not entirely sure it is minimalism.
Oh, okay. I mean, I would say that it's got the repetitive stuff. It changes gradually over time. I guess probably by necessity doesn't have as much of the phasing and the little minute changes as the instrumental stuff, just because there's a story to tell and there's singers to deal with.
Yeah, I guess because it doesn't sound as repetitive as I expected.
Depends on which sections you're listening to. Like, think back to the intro, had the do 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 do, but it does have lots of themes that keep it very entertaining too.
Yeah, I guess because it's quite abrasive. Like, I guess most of the minimalism I'm used to is, for like relaxing or sort of non-confrontational somehow. It's not jarring. Okay,
so then
this is quite jarring.
Let's listen to something in this that actually I think is very relaxing and lovely. We're going to compare this character with her counterpart in this, which is Nixon's wife, Mrs. Nixon. So I think in the video it's 104:32. This is her aria about Christmas.
I don't daydream and don't look back. In this world you can't count on luck. I think what is to be will be in spite of us. I treat each day like Christmas. I think what is to be will be in spite of us. I think what is to be will be in spite of us. I treat each day like Christmas. I treat each day like Christmas. Never have I cared for trivia.
Okay. So does that seem more minimalist to you? It's a little bit more glassy.
Yeah, a little bit. Is it weird that it kind of gives off a musical theater vibe?
I mean, I don't think of it that way, so that's an interesting thought. Um, what I really like about how he wrote this is that so Mrs. Mao was a super high coloratura soprano. This is a lyric soprano, so she's lower, but she's still up there. She has more of a floaty, kind of buttery, rich quality to her voice, but she sounds very like what the real person was, which is a school teacher, right? She sounds very friendly. But she also sounds very trite, talking about how she treats every day like Christmas, and she's talking to a bunch of people who live in communist China, and she's talking about how, like, later in the song, she says something like, "Oh, trivialities are not for me. No, no," and it's like, okay, but honey, you're wearing heels, right? And then in the orchestra, you get more of the minimalist thing of just kind of repeated, and then occasionally the chord changes.
Yeah. I mean, this whole idea of every day being Christmas it's a tad ridiculous and vapid.
Yes. Yeah.
It's very, as you said, trite. I like that word.
Yeah. So the whole time I think you're watching her trying to decide, is she actually a lovely woman or is she actually just like really infuriating? So I like how the music and the way that he cast the voices and the way that he wrote the vocal line really gets that character across, the falseness of them going there, basically. That's kind of I think that's the overall story that gets told, is like, I feel like they went there as a big publicity thing, and that's important to remember. I think that's what he's trying to get across, basically. Still feel like it's not minimalism?
I think it is minimalism for sure. I guess I think because there's a story and there's a fixed end point that's or there's not. How do I describe this? I guess because there's singers, and the singers are singing, like there's a direction for the scene, and it's dramatic. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. I always find that minimalism isn't always dramatic. As soon as it becomes dramatic, it becomes film music for me. It's in this case, it hasn't done that, but whenever it's dramatic, it always becomes film music.
Right. That leads well into the next thing, but I want to just mention one more thing about this as well. One of the things that happens a lot in this opera is 2 against 3. So oftentimes, like in Mrs. Nixon's other aria, her other big moment where she sings "This is Prophetic," the orchestra is always going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and she's always going 1, 2, 1, 2 over top of that, and. So that's really fun, and it kind of gives you that feeling of not. I know it's not phasing, but it kind of gives you the feeling of like 2 different things on top of each other, but they work. So then it's not off-putting.
Yeah, polyrhythm. I mean, that technically is phasing. It's just a very short one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's one that's, bear in mind, right, you need to be able to keep your whole orchestra and a singer, so the orchestra's in a pit, the singers are on stage, there's a conductor, you got to keep that together for a whole show. So I think that to do something with true phasing in that situation would be extremely difficult. Even this is very difficult, right? It's just like, thank God for conductors, but even then,
Yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned... Oh, sorry, what?
Yeah, I mentioned the dramatic aspect. As soon as you add sort of dramaticness to it, like Philip Glass really likes dramatic things. He's always about like the push of the dramatic, it seems. Whereas as Reich does not seem so interested in that. He's more about letting things explode. And then, of course, this is very dramatic because opera is always overly emotional and dramatic in some way.
I mean, not all opera is, but a lot of it is. And I think John Adams, he is often very emotional. And I think it's actually something I like about him. He does have big dramatic builds. Like if you listen to one of my other favorite pieces by him, which hasn't been recorded very much because it's crazy, is Grand Pianola Music. And it's very dramatic, and it's just for an orchestra. But you were saying that as soon as it gets dramatic, you start thinking about film music. And I do have something to discuss with that. I was comparing my favorite bit of John Adams' one of his other operas called Dr. Atomic, with some music that ended up being written for The Dark Knight by Hans Zimmer, and also, he was co-writing it with somebody, right? Jonathan something or other. Ooh, James Newton Howard. I should know that name.
Is that important?
So
I don't know that guy.
I recognize the name from films. He's definitely there.
Okay.
I just don't listen to it independently. Dr. Atomic is another real-life story that is very fascinating, where the villains and the good guys are also not clear-cut, because it's about Oppenheimer, the man who was a big driving force behind the atomic bomb. And so in the aria that we're going to listen to a bit of, he is contemplating the repercussions of his research and is sort of having a moment of like, oh God, what have I done? Using this beautiful poem. And it's also interesting because John Adams used a very, very old traditional aria form, ABA, right? In really old operas, like by Handel and stuff, it would always go kind of like one section, second section, and then you go back to the first section again. And he does that here in a 20th century opera, so that's kind of interesting too. So this is Batter My Heart from Dr. Atomic.
Batter my heart, three-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, knock, breathe, knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend. Batter my heart.
So that's Gerald Finley singing. That he kind of was the first guy to do this role, so he really created what it was supposed to sound like. What do you
It
think?
sounds really good. I really like that. It's
Yeah.
It is very filmy. I can definitely hear the film bits in it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's done so well. I don't care. Yeah, it's done so well that it doesn't matter. It's like, it's expressive. But I think the thing that I noticed with it in comparison to, like, I was watching The Matrix a while ago, and the soundtrack for The Matrix is actually really cool because they use a lot of dissonant things. So in it, the humans are always represented with sort of normal harmony, like this kind of stuff, and then the machines are always represented with what is it called? Like atonal, not atonal, like Messiaen type harmony, which is all whole tony kind of stuff with like giant chords that use all the notes and stuff. And I really like some of the sounds, but there's no transitions because everything is just visual based. So you see the machine, you get the chord, then you see the human, you get the chord.
Mhm.
Whereas this, he's weaving a story using different elements, and it transitions really well. Like, the music comes first. Even
Yeah.
though it still sounds like the film music,
Yeah.
he's still guiding it in a much more fluid and organic way, rather because film music isn't organic because it's like cut to the film.
Yeah.
And like everything is sort of sanded around the edges, and yeah, it just doesn't flow because it doesn't need to.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. It's something that's different. I'm not saying either one is better than the other, but that's what something like opera has to offer, is that the music does come first. You lose some other things with that too. Like, I mean, a lot of opera singers are notoriously poor actors. I not in this case. This guy, I think, does an excellent job with this character.
Is that a thing?
But
Opera singers are bad actors?
oh, yes. But, like, I mean, think about it. It's just, it takes years
Yeah, for sure.
of
It's just
study
like,
just to get the technique to be able to sing like that. And so there's only so much you can do as one person. And
So-
oftentimes acting classes are what really slip through the cracks.
so what would that even look like? So there's like a really good opera singer who can sing super well, but they can't act for shit. Like what?
You'll notice. I mean, you've seen it. It's all over the place.
I haven't picked up on it. I'm not very good at picking up bad actors. It takes me a while to like, oh,
I mean,
they're
part of
not
it
good
too
at
is
acting.
that like opera is very big stage acting. It's closer to clowning than like film
Yeah.
acting is, right?
Yeah.
It's got to
Yeah.
be very dramatic, and a lot of it is based on your gestures, your body language. But there
there's
is
no
a way to
subtlety at
do
all.
that well, right? That's why we have clown schools, which sounds ridiculous, but we do. Anyways,
Yes.
that's a dream piece for me if I magically came back in my next life as a baritone. But what's funny about it is if we listen to the next example, listen to the similarities here. This is from The Dark Knight. So notice it's got the underlying repetitive thing, but then it's got the melody soaring over the top. Just like the overture of Nixon in China, and very much like the arias that we listened to from Nixon in China.
Yeah.
It's got some syncopated textures, and I would argue it's a little bit simpler, but I think it takes a lot of influence from this stuff.
Yeah, I think the thing to note is that there's not very many textures. There's only 2 textures in the Hans Zimmer thing. There's the pizzicato and the bass. There's nothing else happening really. There's like occasional trumpet, but that sort of blends in with the bass. Like you could consider that one line, I would say, because they're sort of hocketing. They're not actually interrupting each other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Nixon and China thing is very dense. He has a lot of stuff happening.
Yeah.
Especially when the singer comes in, there's like him and then a bunch of other things happening in the background that you can't really they can't separate super well. Like everything in this is really separated. It's clearly 2 things that are supporting each other.
Yeah. There's one other part of The Dark Knight that I thought was eerily similar to Dr. Atomic. So that's our last sample there. So same kind of stuff, basically. It works for film because it creates tension, it's got lots of repeats, and it's tonal, but it still kind of seems like it's otherworldly, right? It uses simple chord structures, some somewhat complex rhythmic patterns and orchestration, but it still puts you in a different space, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in the corporate examples of this, the commercials we played on the last episode, it's more about creating an emotion with background music by eliminating the minimalist component of metric modulation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, they're 1-bar loops rather than intersecting passages that are different shapes.
Yeah, it's a lot of copy and paste. Imagine
A lot of
writing
copy.
minimalist music before computers and writing this all out by hand.
I mean, you would just write repeats. You wouldn't actually write it out.
Yeah, I guess so. But think about just that orchestral part. Oh my god, imagine being a second violin on that score. Holy crap.
Well, they did actually play it. That's a real violin.
Oh, I know it is. But imagine being the person who's just going.
Yeah. Carpal tunnel. I mean, I guess it might be fun if you're because I mean, it's dramatic. It'd be kind of fun to just because you can listen while you're playing because you're not doing anything.
I guess so. It's also fun because you'll get a wicked paycheck if you're recording something for a Batman movie.
Yeah. I mean, isn't this like the London Symphony or something? I think this is a famous orchestra. They usually get famous people to do this. I don't know. I don't know enough about this to say.
Anyway, that's basically what I have on John Adams. My favorite piece by him is Common Tones in Simple Time. We're not going to play it because it's 20 minutes long, but I highly recommend if you want to just either zone out and relax or zone in and analyze what's going on. It's a really cool piece of music. We listened to a little bit of him also on our Christian cult episode. We listened to Christian Zeal and Activity. He's probably best known for Short Ride in a Fast Machine, which kind of sounds like what it sounds like right there. He's really cool. And also The Death of Klinghoffer is another very interesting opera that I just haven't dug my teeth into deep enough yet.
Sounds like there's a lot to listen to, though.
Yeah, lots of good stuff. Anyway, thank you for listening. You can find me on the internet by my name, Holly Beckmeyer. You can find me on streaming services. I've got music, and I'm also on TikTok now. And you can go find that at Holly B Music. Where can people find you?
I am on Bandcamp under Nick Grainwing. I'm on streaming services, Happy Kid Toy Band. Yeah, that's pretty much. I'm on Instagram.
Yeah.
All the fun places.
Having a beer with Jesus.
Having a beer with Jesus. It's a great song. We made that song. It was fun. It's all
Yeah, you
about
did.
alcoholism and how Jesus can help you not be an alcoholic because you have a beer with him, but you don't have more than one beer. You just have one.
I don't think that's how alcoholism works.
No, but if you love Jesus, you'll only have one. So
Oh gosh, okay. Well, you can try selling it to AA.
can be their new theme song. I'm excited. Christian AA. Wow.
Well, no, AA is Christian.
Oh, are they?
Yeah,
didn't
they're
know that.
entirely based in handing over your agency to a higher power in order to get out of your state of mind. Which does work for a lot of people,
That's
but not everyone.
well, I guess if it works, don't.
Yeah, it's
Destroy it.
problematic. It's problematic because if you're an
Yeah,
atheist,
that would not work for
that's...
me. I'd be like, I like the devil and his beer. Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Anyways. John Adams. Yay.